Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Coherence Effect, Restoring Rhythms for Health, Resilience, and Cohesion. My name is Janelle Corpuz, and over the next 90 minutes, I'm going to guide you through one of the most underappreciated frameworks in health and wellness right now, and that is that the body is a layered set of rhythms, and most of what we call health or illness has to do with whether those rhythms are aligned or disrupted. So before we begin, I will just briefly introduce myself and my background. My name is, again, Janelle Corpus. I am a sound therapy educator and the founder and lead instructor of Kin Unified Healing Institute of Sound. I have also created an app called the Resonance Lab, which is the first pocket sound therapy app. And most people know me for my personal healing journey. I healed myself from infertility using the power of sound. And that experience actually launched nearly a decade of self-research and field practice through which I began to develop the original Kin ideology, which has formed multiple clinical protocols with the use of sound. So among these is the Kin Sound Therapy Practitioner Certification, which received AHNA accreditation in 2023 and an endorsement in 2026. And we've trained practitioners at the VA. We also founded Kin Academy, which specializes in sound therapy and mindfulness for children ages 4 to 11, with a primary focus on demonstrating the benefits of sound for kids with neurodevelopmental disorders. And these therapies are actually currently delivered to kids through the San Gabriel Valley Pomona Regional Center and also Montessori. My mission is to empower individuals in healthcare and also in all walks of life with the tools and the knowledge to tap into your own healing potential. And so that is the crux of my work, and I am very passionate about that, and I'm very excited to share this with you today. All right, so we'll start here at foundation. And the foundation is going to be an introduction to nested rhythms and a framework called Chronomedicine. So before we actually dive deep into this lecture, I just want us to take a deep breath together and to become aware of the rhythms in the room right now. So go ahead and gently close your eyes and place one hand on your belly and one hand on your chest. And let's just take a deep breath in together, slowly through the nose, all the way down into the belly, feeling the belly rise and expand. And then slowly exhaling out once again through the nose. And again together to a time. So just follow my cue. We're breathing in through the nose, down to the belly, and out the nose again. 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 4, 3, 2, 1. Deep inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4, and sigh it out. Very good. Now, with your eyes still closed and your hand on your belly and your heart, I just want you to become aware mentally of some of the rhythms that are in your body right now. So just start to make a little checklist. Name some rhythms that you are aware of in your body. And name some rhythms that you are aware of in the room if you're sitting with other people. And whenever you're ready, you can gently open your eyes and release the hands. So how many of you said the heartbeat? How many of you said the brain waves? How many of you in here said the cortisol cycle? Did anybody say the monthly cycle or the menstruation cycle? So what I want to illustrate here is that all these rhythms that exist in our bodies are nested within larger cycles of rhythm in nature, right? So day and night, the lunar cycle, the seasons, the Earth's orbit around the sun. These are all grander motions that are not in our awareness. And so it it makes it feel like the things that we experience in our bodies are just singular problems, but actually they have a myriad of effects within the body and also without, because all rhythms actually influence each other from the micro to the macrocosmic. And the principle that governs that phenomena is called entrainment. So entrainment is the propensity for oscillatory processes to lock up or to phase in sync with each other when they actually share a medium, right? And so the human body has the capacity and the propensity to entrain to external stimuli. From the moment that we're born to the moment that we die, we're entraining and also experiencing this vibration without and within. Okay. So we are largely unaware of the rhythms that entrain us. And so this framework that we're going to start to see unfold through this presentation is that when rhythms are aligned, these oscillatory processes that are communication processes in our body govern our health. And when they are disrupted, they actually pose a risk of disease. So we're going to dive into this framework, which is nature's nested rhythm. So we're going to look at the macrocosmic all the way down to the microcosmic. So we see that rhythms exist at every scale of the natural world, and we know that the body systems are a myriad of interlocking oscillatory processes. But how many times do we ever stop to bring awareness to how these rhythms are actually nested inside of larger ones within the natural world? Now think about our existence as humankind on Earth and how long we've been evolving within this sphere. We have been trained to nature's nested rhythms, natural cycles, but we become so disconnected from that. These are the four cycles in nature that we have been trained to through our evolutionary process. The first one is the diurnal or the solar cycle, which happens every 24 hours. Now, this is Earth's rotation and it drives the day and night light cycle. The second one is the lunar cycle, which happens approximately every 29.5 days, which is the moon's synodic period. It drives the tides, and there's cultural and biological speculation about how menstruation is entrained to the lunar cycle. And then we have the seasonal cycle, which is every 3 months, depending on the latitude that you live in on the Earth. But this is driven by the Earth's axial tilt and its annual orbit, and it informs the changing day length across the year. And then you have the annual cycle, which is approximately every 365 days, which takes the Earth to fully orbit around the sun. So now we want to ask, where does the human body fit in to these rhythmic cycles that exist in nature? There was a 2025 review in Frontiers in Sleep by Morin, Forrest, and Imbolt, which describes the human body as a layered set of rhythmic domains, and each one is entrained or generated in relationship to a specific scale of natural rhythms. All right, so the first cycle we're going to talk about within the human body is the circadian rhythm. Okay, I think most people are very aware of this. It happens every 24 hours, and it's entrained by the solar or the diurnal cycle, where light is the dominant Zeitberger. So when we receive light through the eyes, it governs our sleep-wake cycles, our cortisol awakening response, our core body temperature, melatonin, and also blood pressure. The second set of rhythms in our body happens at a smaller scale. So these are the ultradian rhythms, which happen around every 90 minutes. These rhythms are primarily endogenous, so they're not really tied to an external cycle, but they are modulated by circadian input. And so this thing governs things like sleep stages, our hormonal pulses, our BRAC, our basic rest, and our attention rhythms. So you see when you're doing things, you'll see that you kind of need a break every 90 minutes. That is the ultradian rhythm cycle. And the last cycle is a much larger cycle, which is the infradian. So this happens at a scale of larger than 28 hours. And there's multiple rhythms with different drivers. So something like the menstrual cycle, which happens every 28 days. Now, this is endogenous. It happens through the HPO axis. And I mentioned that it is culturally or biologically linked somewhat to the lunar cycle. And then you have your seasonal cycle. This is the cycle where the body entrains to the length of day. Our vitamin D production. This is why we have things like seasonal affective depressive disorder. It governs things that have to do with our thyroid, our immunity, and also our fertility. And then you have the annual cycle, which happens roughly every 365 days. And you see that this is actually entrained by the solar year. This happens at a larger scale in the collective. So you can see things like birth seasonality, mortality, and all the metabolic shifts happening with the annual cycle. So we see that the body is oscillatory and at every scale. We have our circadian clock genes, these internal timing genes that run a 24-hour clock, which tell our cells when to wake, when to release hormones, when to repair, and when to rest. There are the cortisol ultradian pulses. So this is, released. This is where cortisol is released in these small rhythmic waves throughout the day to regulate our energy and our alertness. And we have cardiac variability, HRV, which shows that a healthy heart actually subtly changes in time between beats, which reflects a strong nervous system. There's also respiratory sinus arrhythmia. This is where our heart naturally speeds up when we inhale and slows down when we exhale, which shows the connection between breath and the nervous system balance. Then there are neural oscillations. So things like alpha brainwave state, theta brainwave state. This is where the brain communicates through electrical rhythms that shift depending on what we're doing. So whether we're focused, whether we're meditating, trying to solve a problem, trying to emotionally process something, this is what affects our brain rhythms. So you can see that now rhythm is it's a language of communication within the body and also within people because our nervous systems also have rhythms that we actually feel and can feed off of. So rhythmic oscillations are signals that the body uses to communicate. And so when these signals are off, they are off rhythm, they misfire, certain communications are happening that should not be communicated, like a bad game of like telephone, right? And that can cause risk for disease. Okay, so now that we've determined that the body is oscillatory, we also want to ask the question, how does the body keep its time? All right, so we're going to talk about two timekeepers in the body. One is located in the brain and one is located in the heart. And that matters when we are talking about the definitions of coherence. Okay, so the first timekeeper in the body is the SCN, and it operates at the circadian time scale. So it operates at a larger time scale of hours and the daily cycle. The SCN stands for suprachiasmatic nucleus, and it's located in the anterior hypothalamus. It's 20,000 cells, and they're all clock cells. So it's the master pacemaker that is synchronized to light. 50% of our protein coding genes actually show circadian transcription in at least one tissue. So we have peripheral clocks in our entire bodies, in the liver and the pancreas and the gut and our fat and our muscle. These are all tied to the SCN. And then we have the heart as the second timekeeper at the sub-second time scale. So whereas the SCN in the brain operates at a larger circadian time scale, the heart operates at the sub-second time scale from moment to moment or individual heartbeats. There was a study that was done by Sargent and co-authors in 2024 that was funded by the National Institute for Mental Health, and it was published in the Journal of Psychological Science that took 37 healthy adults and hooked them up into a 90-channel EEG and EKG simultaneously, and they asked a simple question. When the heart and the brain communicate, who is leading the conversation? And what they found was that heart rate fluctuations actually modulated every major brainwave band. In the Granger causality analysis, the heart drove the brain more than the brain drove the heart in 4 out of the 5 bands, and the effect sizes were enormous. And so this matters when we are actually defining coherence, because coherence means that these two timekeepers, these two coordinators are actually aligned. And it's important to define coherence because I start to see it being defined in a sort of metaphorical sense, like aligning my chakras, you know what I mean? Like that sort of thing. And actually, it is a measurable state of synchronization across oscillatory systems by definition. So the heart, the breath, and the brain, for there to be coherence, have to show all the same sine wave frequency. It is the measurement of 0.1 hertz. Now, this is called the resonance frequency, and it can be actually induced or produced on purpose through your own breath at 6 breaths per minute or 1 oscillation every 10 seconds. And this has been documented in cardiology, psychology, and also neuroscience. So we know that when we take a slow breath, and our heart rhythm shifts, that shift actually propagates upward into our brainwave activity. And so that's the pathway, the breath, the heart, and then the brain. And this is the mechanism of coherence. We now see that the heart and the brain are actually a couple. And so why is this important? It's important because HRV actually influences our emotional processing. So when heart rhythms are stable and flexible, our emotional reactions actually become more regulated and less reactive. And we know that cardiac rhythms actually modulate our cortical network. So the pattern of the heartbeat actually organizes activities in the brain regions that are responsible for attention and decision making, executive function. Actually, greater heart rate variability is associated with clearer thinking and impulse control, and also cognitive flexibility. So the heart's rhythm acts as a timing cue that helps coordinate the nervous system as a whole. But this can actually be hacked by the breath. And there's a framework for this thing that we're talking about, and the framework is called chronomedicine. And so most nurses and people that work in healthcare already operate on some fundamentals of chronomedicine, things like chrononutrition, like meal timing, or chronotherapeutics, medication timing, right? But chronomedicine is actually aligning health interventions with the body's natural rhythms. Okay. And so, in this same study that I've been speaking about in 2025, Frontiers in Sleep, Moore and Forrest and Bolt, they actually recognize two more primary pillars of health, not just nutrition and activity, but sleep and actually circadian function are now recognized as primary pillars of health. And so for nurses, this can mean a redefinition of what wellness counseling looks like, because I think very rarely do we look at sleep and also circadian balance. All right, so that was part number one. So foundation, disruption, restoration. We just went over foundation. We understood what nested rhythms are in the natural world and how our bodily rhythms actually align with those. We understand the coordinators, the timekeepers in the body. We now understand the definition of coherence, the actual definition of coherence, and that there is a framework for what we're talking about called chronomedicine. Now, in sections 2 and 3, we're going to talk about disruption and how you experience disruption from an occupational standpoint and also from an environmental and an endogenous standpoint. So we're going to look at your occupation and we're going to look at the people that you serve. And then in part number 4, we're going to talk about restoration. So 4 evidence-based practices that you can use to restore rhythmic balance in the body. And then also the last part will be translation. So how to practice, how to bring this into self-care, what is your commitment to restoring rhythmic balance. So part number 2, we're going to speak about nurses and rhythm disruption. By a show of hands here, how many of you have worked night shift in the last 5 years? How many of you have worked night shift in the last year? And how many of you have worked night shift in the last week? So this next section, I'm going to preface this by saying, has a lot of discouraging data in regards to shift work and in regards to your occupation as a nurse. And I am not bringing this up to be the bearer of bad news. I am bringing this up to be able to name what these things are so that you as holistic nurses are able to think about and bring awareness to these inevitable, measurable cycles that need intervention. And so take this almost as a challenge for you to bring more leadership into your institutions, into your practice, and among your colleagues. All right, so let's start here with the cortisol rhythm. And I just thought the Eurythmic was a cool band from the 80s, but it actually is the term for the cortisol rhythm. We know cortisol as the stress hormone, but it's actually a rhythm hormone. There is a thing called the cortisol awakening response, which is a 50 to 150% surge within 30 to 45 minutes of waking. So remember, I was talking about how we have evolved and entrained to the diurnal, the solar day, right? So we're supposed to experience a cortisol awakening response in the morning when we wake up, and it's supposed to surge between 50 to 150% within 30 to 45 minutes of waking. And so what that does is that it mobilizes our energy, it prepares our cognition, and it modulates our immunity. And then it's supposed to gradually decline through the day and hit a low point overnight so that we can sleep. This is regulated by the SCN via the retinal hypothalamic tract through the eyes through the HPA axis. Now, what happens when this cortisol rhythm is dysregulated in terms of night shift? Night shift actually produces profound misalignment in the cortisol rhythm in these three ways. So, the first way is that there is going to be a blunted cortisol awakening response. So, your morning surge is going to fall short of the eurythmic, which is that surge, and it's just not going to curve at all. And so that results in a flattened profile, which is misalignment number two, where the cortisol actually stays elevated all day and night instead of cycling. And then that leads to misalignment number three, which is a phase shift. So the timing of secretion actually drifts out of phase with the solar day. So no longer are we healthily entrained to the diurnal, the thing that we've evolved with. We are actually drifting out of phase with it, and we are no longer entrained by the light cycle. And so the lived experience in this actually equals a flattened curve, which you'll see in this next slide. So to the left is what a healthy cortisol curve looks like, okay? So you see it peaking in the morning, and then it slowly sort of tapers off during the day and reaches a low point at night. The curve cycles cleanly, and it helps you to wake feeling alert. It helps you to feel tired when it becomes dark, and then it helps you to sleep cleanly. Now, this curve to the right, or the lack of a curve to the right, is what happens after night shift work. So it's very dysregulated. The CAR is blunted, the diurnal curve flattens, it's elevated all day and night. And so the feeling that you get here is this feeling of wired and tired, of being foggy when you should actually be sharp, and then just lying there awake when you're super tired, ready to go to sleep. You're just staring at the wall, right? So there is a cascading effect to this type of dysregulation here. And again, this is not put forth here to scare anybody or to deter them from doing shift work or to deter them even from the occupation that you choose. It is to bring awareness to these things that are measurable and inevitable and have proven themselves to be present all the way across these very many studies. So the first one, which is the most harrowing, is that in a 2019 classification by the International Agency for Research on Cancer, based on limited human epidemiological evidence, sufficient animal evidence, and strong mechanistic evidence linking circadian disruption to cancer risk. So night shift work is actually listed as an IARC Group 2A carcinogen. Okay. And then there are all these other sort of side effects that happen that you may or may not have already experienced. Things like metabolic shifts, glucose intolerance, weight gain, type 2 diabetes risk. There's also cardiovascular risk, hypertension, atherosclerosis, endothelial dysfunction, long-term NSW, immune system shifts, right? So reduced surveillance, chronic inflammation, a shift in mood, depression, anxiety, amygdala hypervigilance. And then, of course, the sleep is affected, right? Because cortisol suppresses melatonin and it just becomes a vicious cycle over and over. Now we're going to zoom into the female specific layer and focus on shift work and women's reproductive health. There was a meta-analysis that was done by Hugh and co-authors in 2023 that was published in SSM Population Health, where they actually took a pool of 21 studies. There was actually almost 200,000 women pooled. Many of them were nurses from these larger cohorts like the Schernhammer NHS and the Lawson NHS, and also hospital staff worldwide. And what they found was that there was a 30% chance of irregular menstruation, a 35% increased chance in dysmenorrhea, and a 9% increased chance of early menopause for those who engaged in shift work. And actually, women under 30 were more vulnerable. It was a 70% increased chance of menstrual irregularity. And now we're going to take this information and go into shift work across the climacteric. And what this shows is actually that shift work, the harmful effects of shift work is actually dose dependent. For nurses who worked from 11 to 19 years night shift, there was a 22% increased chance in early menopause. And for those who worked above 20 years in shift work, there was a 73% increased chance of early menopause. And the study was done in 2019 with 80,840 nurses. So the longer the exposure, the higher the risk. Now, there was also significantly higher breast cancer risk in nurses that worked over 30 years of night shift, okay, in postmenopausal nurses. There was also especially pronounced weight gain and obesity in postmenopausal women, and this was a study that was done on Dutch nurses. And also, there was a study done on Japanese nurses that showed excessive daytime sleepiness in nurses over 60 when there was shift work involved. And this actually compromised quality of life and created an increase of medical errors. Now, we're going to go into environmental disruptions, right? Because a lot of the times it's not just about working odd hours, right? It's about working in environments that are physiologically loud. I did a talk last year called Beyond Silence, and I actually highlighted hospital noise as something that was an environmental rhythm disruptor because most hospitals operate at a decibel level that is way louder than what the World Health Organization actually recommends for hospitals to be at for healing environments. So you can think about hospital noise. I'm sure you guys can imagine working a shift and all of the alarms and the monitors and code cards and foot traffic, they all sit inside the same mechanism that is physiologically active. It's not just irritating, it's actually activating the HPA axis, causing stress. And so what they found here in this Korean occupational noise study was that there was a 49% chance increase of depressive symptoms in women when the environments are physiologically loud. There was a 58% chance increase of depressive symptoms in men and a higher rate of suicidal ideation in both. When we think about the mechanism that creates this rhythmic disruption in our bodies, it is that axis. There's the noise exposure, then it activates through the HPA axis, it raises the cortisol, and then it drives sympathetic dominance. Okay, so I'm going to repeat this same mechanism over and over again just to show you how so many of the different things that disrupt our rhythm operate on the same pathway in order to show that we can hack this pathway and bring about some type of intervention that can bring restoration. Okay, so let's reframe all of this information. When a nurse develops hypertension, weight gain, or anxiety after years of shift work, this is not a failure on the nurse's part. This is actually occupational physiology because we see that these things are predictable. They've been documented across multiple cohorts. They are measurable. They've been quantified in physiology and epidemiology. They're mechanism-based, which we've identified the mechanism, HPA axis, cortisol, circadian disruption. And because of this, we know that they're amenable to intervention. So things like stress management, mindfulness, and self-care activities are not indulgences that we are at the luxury of having. They're actually responsibilities that we owe to ourselves and to our clients because we know that this is an occupational hazard that we are going to be experiencing. It also should become a responsibility in terms of the institution and how they provide these things for stress management, mindfulness, and self-care. So this is where we're going next. So let's get into part number 3, which is women's hormonal health and environmental and social disruptors, the client focus. So part 2 was about you as nurses. And part number 3 is going to be about the women that you serve. We are so lucky to be women because we actually experience rhythm disruption from 3 converging axes all at once. And this is something that is specific to women. And so here are some of the vulnerabilities that we actually don't think about. There are 3 domains of vulnerability for rhythm disruption that affect our health. The first one is hormonal. And so this is the cycle itself. This is something we cannot do anything about. We've experienced this type of rhythmic disruption ever since our first menstrual cycle when we were in adolescence, okay? This is an endogenous rhythmic vulnerability that we just have to live with in our human experience as women, okay? So things like menstrual cycle fluctuation, the perimenopausal transition, and all these estrogen-mediated stress reactivities that we experience with the fluctuation of these cycles that occur within the infradian, which is the 29.5 days roughly that we experience monthly. Then there is the environmental factors, right? So what are the things that surround us? There are certain external rhythmic disruptors that are also converging with that hormonal rhythmic disruptor, which is things like artificial light at night, okay? Occupational and urban noise. and reduced time in nature. So artificial light at night, it doesn't mean that it doesn't have to always mean that you're working a night shift under these fluorescent lights. It could mean you're binge watching Netflix, you're doom scrolling, to go to sleep. Occupational and urban noise does not have to always mean just being in a hospital. It could be I work at a bar. It could be driving Uber. It could be, working at an airline and listening to all of the air traffic noise and things like that. Many of us live in cosmopolitan areas and we do have a reduced time in nature. We have a lack of green space in many of the areas that we lived. And so nature being one of those powerful entraining spaces that we can go to where there is so much 1F pink noise frequency and just organic rhythm that is happening all around us, just being away from artificial light, artificial noise, artificial frequency. Okay. And then the last domain of vulnerability is the social domain. So who are we connected to? We know in terms of relationship science that the people that we choose to be around, especially romantically, definitely affect our health and our stress levels, right? But there are also these things like social isolation, feelings of loneliness, and chronic stress activation. As humans, we need other nervous systems to validate what we're experiencing. So we're constantly in training and going back and forth in terms of our nervous system rhythm with the people that we are around. Without that, we start to feel heightened. We start to feel like we might be in danger because we've evolved in this need to belong, to feel safety in groups. And so once again, all of these rhythmic disruptions in these domains of vulnerability share the same mechanism. It's the HPA axis. It affects our autonomic balance. There's estrogen-mediated regulation. These are all different disruptors, but they share the same pathway. So we have hope that they can share the same pathway for restoration. There was a study that was done among 397 women, and they were made to take the Cohen's perceived stress test twice in the same cycle. What they found was that when the estrogen was high in the late follicular phase, that the PSS score was 20.25. And then when the estrogen dropped, it actually raised about 4 more points. All right. So testing the same women 2 times in the same cycle showed this type of differentiation when it came to perceived stress. Okay, actually 97.7% reported moderate to severe stress in the late luteal phase. And there was a very strong correlation between perceived stress and dysmenorrhea. So however high the perceived stress was, the more painful the period was. So we're going to actually shift this into the climacteric once again, because I want you to pay attention to how consistent the rhythm signature is across menopause symptoms. So things like hot flashes, sleep quality, mood severity, estradiol profile. This is all tracking with this rhythmic disruption or the circadian disruption. First, let's talk about the full physiological window around decreased ovarian function, so premenopause through postmenopause. This is what the World Health Organization calls the climacteric. So this is the age range between 45 and 55 for spontaneous menopause. When we look at hot flashes, this is a vasomotor reaction, right? We have frequency and severity associated with circadian disruption. What this study actually shows from ZOO in 2020 was that sunlight exposure has a measurable effect on the score. For every hour of sunlight a woman gets, it created a reduction in the severity of hot flashes that they experienced. And now, sleep quality. So suppressed melatonin metabolites, elevated nighttime cortisol disrupts sleep architecture. So there is a disruption in sleep that happens in premenopause and postmenopause. And then there is mood severity. Okay, so there is a greater severity of menopausal mood symptoms that are documented in disrupted rhythm populations. And then, of course, there's the hormonal disruption. So postmenopausal women with circadian disruption show elevated estradiol patterns. The menstruation life cycle and then the menopausal life cycle that we experience as women are these endogenous cycles where we are rhythmically disrupted no matter what, regardless, because we are women. So lucky us. That is the first domain of vulnerability. Now, the second domain of vulnerability was the environment. There are actually studies that show that environmental noise or environmental noise disruption actually affects our mood very, very greatly. So for your female clients who don't work nights, environmental noise from traffic and aircraft actually drives mood disorder risk through the same HPA axis pathway documented in shift workers. What they found in the study was that depression raised by double, and so did anxiety when there was environmental noise annoyance. There was actually a study that was done on mice and air traffic noise. And what they found was that what was causing the harm wasn't the loudness in the decibels of the sound that was being created, what is actually the irregularity of the pattern. Okay, so think about that. If we have the propensity to entrain to rhythmic auditory stimuli and the stimuli is disordered or unpatterned, then our breath will sort of move that way, and that actually will cause our heart and our brain to communicate in a certain type of disordered way as well. Now, environmental noise is not just a psychological risk, it is also a cardiometabolic risk. So there's actually a physiological component that happens when there is environmental noise. So the World Health Organization data actually estimated traffic noise cost more than 15 million healthy life years lost over a year, and over 1 million extra cases of cardiometabolic disease, and around 18,000 deaths from heart disease and stroke. So again, environmental noise, same mechanism, HPA axis, raises the cortisol, raises the oxidative stress, goes to endothelial dysfunction. And again, this is the same pathway underlying cardiovascular and psychological harm. So the second environmental disruptor is actually light itself, particularly light at night, artificial light at night. Researchers pooled 17 studies, and women with the most light at night had about an 11% higher breast cancer risk than those with less. And this actually held across many different study designs, so it's not a fluke. It's actually stronger before menopause, around 16%, probably because there's more estrogen circulating, and it's actually dose related. So more light equals more risk, okay? Now, the mechanism is the same. Once again, it's the SEN melatonin axis as shift work, okay? And so what happens is light at night suppresses the melatonin, and it elevates estrogen synthesis, which drives DNA damage and oxidative stress. So once again, the same clock disrupted by a different input. All right, so the third domain that we were talking about is actually just a lack of time in nature, so a lack of green space. Green space deprivation affects women's cortisol. This is a very interesting study. There was a salivary cortisol study done on people in low green space areas. And what it showed was that these people in low green space areas actually showed the same flattened cortisol curve that we saw with shift work. And people with more green space actually looked healthier. The cortisol benefit of green space showed up in women and not in men. So access for nature isn't just a soft amenity for women's physiology. It's actually a need, right? It's because it's measurable in the stress hormone itself. All right, so now we've gone through all of the environmental rhythm disruptors. So there's noise annoyance, artificial light at night, and reduced time in nature. Those are the 3 environmental rhythm disruptors. And now we're going to get into the third axis, which is social, all right? And so let me connect this once again. Human beings are social oscillators. We oscillate with each other's nervous systems. There's, research that was done by HeartMath that shows that actually when we are in close proximity with each other, you can entrain someone's brain waves up to 3 feet away. And then when you touch them, your heart and your brain actually start to couple in terms of rhythms. So we are social oscillators. For most of our history, safety came from being in a group. And so the body learned to read group connection as safety, all right? And isolation can be read as being exposed or being in danger. And so what happens is that the nervous system is taught to stay on guard when you are alone or isolated. Connection is a signal that the nervous system keeps time with, the same way that the eyes keep time with light, okay? So when that signal goes quiet, when someone is isolated or lonely, the body doesn't just, it's not just a feeling of sadness. It's actually an ongoing threat. It feels like an ongoing threat. And so the stress system will remain switched on and the cortisol will stay elevated. And this is the same flat curve that we saw in night shift work. Here's the evidence. Nearly 58,000 postmenopausal women were followed for 8 years and they were studied for isolation alone. So what they found was there was an 8% higher cardiovascular risk. They were followed for loneliness alone, and that showed a 5% chance of higher cardiovascular risk. And then they were followed for loneliness and isolation alone. So there's three different groups. There was loneliness alone, isolation alone, and then loneliness and isolation alone. And isolation and loneliness actually showed a 13% increased chance for cardiovascular risk. And this was actually fully adjusted for health behaviors. So it's not that just isolated people exercised less or they smoked more. Across all of these different studies, that the body itself is actually carrying the cost of loneliness, isolation, and those two things together. So again, this is the same pathway as shift work, okay? The same pathway as environmental noise. This is why we can see this plainly. Disconnection physiologically is a rhythm disruptor. It keeps the stress clock from ever cycling back down. HPA axis, sympathetic nervous system, enhanced inflammation, oxidative stress, atherosclerosis development, same pathway as shift work and environmental noise. All right, so let's synthesize this information. We see here there are 6 different disruptors, and they all share the same pathway. There is cycle stress, or the endogenous stress that we experience from our luckiness for being women in our menstrual cycle and also postmenopause and beyond. There is mood and how it is driven by noise. There is artificial light at night, all these artificial frequencies that we are entrained by. There is the lack of natural green space or all around us. And then there is the aspect of isolation and loneliness. So all of these disruptors work upon the same mechanism: HPA axis dysregulation, autonomic imbalance, oxidative stress or inflammation, estrogen-mediated regulation. Okay. And this is exactly why restoration can move through that same axis as we hack this mechanism. And that leads us to evidence-based rhythm interventions. So we spent about 40 minutes or so on disruption, and now we're going to spend the rest of the time on how to restore the disruption. I'm going to give you 4 evidence-based rhythm interventions: forest therapy, resonance breathing. These 2 have the strongest support in terms of meta-analysis and things like that. Group toning has also emerged as a mechanism for evidence. And then slow drumming, which is also supported by a convergent set of peer-reviewed studies plus rhythmic entrainment principles. Disruption and regulation move through the same pathway. So hacking the HPA axis through rhythmic entrainment is what is going to bring about the restoration. All right. So the first evidence-based intervention is forest therapy. And this works on our circadian rhythm and cortisol regulation. So it's not just about, going and being in actual nature. When in actual nature, you are surrounded and you are in training to multitudes of 1F pink noise frequency that has a steady rhythm to it, right? There's also the subtraction of all of these artificial frequencies like artificial light, artificial noise, and things like that. So you're much more easily entrained because of all the low frequencies that are surrounding you. But it doesn't just require actually being in forest. It can actually work through a simulation, which is what we're going to look at. Number 2 is resonance breathing. So this is neural, cardiac, and respiratory entrainment at 0.1 hertz or 6 breaths per minute or 1 oscillation every 10 seconds. Okay. The third one is group vocal toning. So in group vocal toning, there is vagus nerve stimulation. There's also an aspect of emotional regulation that's happening with vocal toning. Number 1, the voice holds so many codes from your nervous system that you are not even aware of. You think about how much we suppress our emotions, how much we suppress the things that we actually really want to say. that gets embedded into the nervous system, and it actually can manifest through the way that you speak, just your vocal tone, right? This is why sometimes when you are talking to somebody, even though they're saying all of the right things, you can tell in their tone that there is something, just not quite right, or something that's just hidden underneath, or it's making you feel some type of way. So the voice holds codes, and when we tone, we're actually releasing the sound of our natural emotions, even though we're not meaning to, and that is creating an awareness, a meaning making in our conscious awareness. And then the fourth intervention is slow drumming, and this operates upon the principles of rhythmic entrainment and also social cohesion. So anytime that you do things together in a group, like vocal toning or even drumming, that is everyone's nervous system entraining to each other. So it's this feeling of being held within the group. Because we entrain to rhythmic auditory stimuli, this group drumming actually is going to modulate the way that we breathe, which is going to modulate the way that our heart beats, which is going to modulate what our brain is doing. All right, so let's talk about forest therapy. All right, there was three studies that were done, and they all converge on the same answer. In this paper by Song in 2021, what it showed was that 90 seconds, only 90 seconds of forest visual and audio actually produced the strongest autonomic shift of any condition that was tested. They showed that the prefrontal cortex, the activity in the prefrontal cortex went down, and heart rate variability increased. Okay. In a second follow-up paper done by Song in 2023, they tested brief nature audio versus urban traffic. And what it showed was that the brief nature audio actually significantly improved mood and post-task autonomic recovery, and it only took 1 minute. In another paper by Yi in 2022, what it showed was the clinical outcome. There were 0 adverse effects across 17 RCTs, and there was also a significant reduction in depressive symptoms. So forest therapy creates a real autonomic shift. It doesn't even need to be, you don't even need to actually be in a forest. There can be a simulation of the forest in terms of visual and audio. So this actually can be a really accessible delivery format, and also a very low risk intervention that is available, because there's obviously already screens inside of your facilities, and also mechanisms that play sound. So let's experience this together. We're just going to sit here and watch the screen of this forest landscape, and also listen to the audio. And I want you to pay attention to what it is actually doing to your nervous system. Feel what's happening in your body. Feel what's happening to your breath and to your heart when this is played, and see how long it takes for you to start to feel calm or stabilized. All right, let's begin. All right, beautiful. Maybe you can take a moment here to write down the shifts that you might have felt and how long it took to shift. Let's go into intervention number 2, which is resonance breathing. So resonance breathing is 1 breath every 10 seconds or 6 breaths per minute. And the way that I facilitate resonance breathing is just through a count. It's the count that we did right in the beginning of the presentation. There were 2 studies that support the immediate effect of resonance breathing for immediate affect and sustained physiological change. So we remember from section 1 that coherence is actually measured at 0.1 hertz, 1 breath cycle every 10 seconds. So there were 2 studies that were done. In the first study, they tested the immediate effect. And so they tested that paced breathing against a few other conditions, and it produced the biggest jump in heart rhythm coherence of anything that they tried. Okay. So breathing at your natural unpaced rate did almost nothing for heart coherence. So the pace, the interval is what matters. And then they tried in the same study paced singing at that same 10-second cycle. And it produced essentially the same effect as paced breathing. So it's not the actual act of breathing, and it's not the singing. Okay, so it's not the mechanism, it's actually the frequency. So the interval, the 10-second cycle is the thing that does the work. The time is the thing that does the work, however it is that you're going to get there. Now, in the second study, they tested to see if coherence was actually a trainable capacity. And so people practiced this 20 minutes a day for 4 weeks. And by the end, their heart rhythm was measurably steadier and more flexible. Their thinking was sharper on attention tests, and their stress was actually lower. So now we know that coherence is actually trainable. So it has an immediate effect. And the more that you do it, you're able to shift your baseline coherence into a higher state. And so now I'm going to guide you through a rhythmic breath practice. So what we know is that 5 minutes of paced breathing at 0.1 hertz produces immediate resonance, and that 20 minutes a day for 4 weeks produce sustained autonomic, cognitive, and stress benefits. So you can train this with yourself every day, and I'll show you how right now. So go ahead and just follow my lead as we do this breath practice. Gently close the eyes and bring your awareness to your heart. Become aware of how fast or how slow the heart is beating. And together we're going to begin to breathe to a count. So just follow my lead. Make sure that when you are breathing, it is through the nose, all the way down into the belly. And when you exhale out, let it also empty out through the nose. Inhale for 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale 4, 3, 2, 1. Deep inhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale 4, 3, 2, 1. Deep inhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhale for 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 4, 3, 2, 1. Deep inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 4, 3, 2, 1. Deep inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Sigh it out. Inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Sigh it out. Deep inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Sigh it out. Inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Sigh it out. Inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Sigh it out. Deep inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Sigh it out. Inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Sigh it out. Very good. So those last few tonal exhales are not technically part of resonance breath, but they are things that I add on when I do breathwork practice for what we are going to go into next, which is vocal toning. So that audible sigh and the buzzing and the shushing, those sorts of things actually help with elongating the exhale. Also opens up the body and the breath for vocalization. So that's something that I added on to there. Okay. All right. So the third intervention that we're going to be going into is group toning. Or in this paper, there were 18 non-experts created to sing together in pairs or tone together in pairs. They actually were not trained at all in singing. They were non-experts. So they sang sustained notes in pairs with their heart rate variability measured in both of them at once. And so what was shown in this research was that they both started to couple. Their HRVs, their heart rhythm started to couple. So what happened in the next part of this study is that they mathematically removed the breathing aspect. So that timed breath pattern, they removed it. Okay. And what happened was that the breath only coupling actually collapsed, but the long note coupling held. So something beyond a synchronized breath was happening when people held a long tone together. And what happened that was also really interesting is that this sustained tone that they were creating naturally fell within the measurement of the coherence frequency or the resonance frequency. And there was this empirical bridge, which is the 9.1 second breath cycle that was happening when they were doing the sustained group vocalization equaled 0.11 hertz, which is almost exactly the measurement of the resonance frequency. So what that shows is that group vocalization naturally produces breathing rhythms close to coherence frequency without anyone trying to manipulate it, without anyone being told to do that, okay? All right, so we know that this mechanism is accessible because a bunch of non-professionals, non-choir trained people, non-singers did this. So we're going to do this toning practice together now. And we're just going to use a sustained vowel, which, I just like to tone on the sound om, and we'll do that in the next slide. All right, so we're going to do some group toning. Once again, this is something that you can do for yourself at every day to raise your coherence. All right. So again, I just want you to take note of how you feel, things that might have shifted in your nervous system, in your thought, in your emotions or your body, and just take note of these after every intervention. So the next practice, the next evidence-based practice that we are going to be talking about is group rhythm. Now, there were 3 peer-reviewed studies that converge on a measurable physiological shift when it comes to group rhythm. And this happens by neural entrainment. The first study was by Bittman in 2001. There was neuroendocrine reversal that was shown after 1 hour of group drumming. It increased the DHEA cortisol ratio and natural killer cell activity. So this was a measurable reversal of the classical stress response documented against controls. The second paper was Hove in 2016, which noted a brain state shift during drumming. fMRI during shamanic drumming at 4 Hertz showed default mode and salience network reconfiguration, consistent with deep meditative absorption and perceptual decoupling. And then there was also cardiorespiratory coupling that was shown. So slow rhythmic auditory input slows respiration, synchronizes cardiovascular oscillations, which is the same 0.1 Hertz pathway from sections 1 and 3. This cardiorespiratory coupling through rhythmic auditory stimuli is something that is well documented in a lot of different papers, things like studies that were done at universities. I can't remember which university it was now, actually showed that when people work out to hard driving, upbeat rock music, the workout actually lasts less long. When there's workouts that are done to slow, easy listening music, they find that the workouts last longer because the heart is in training to that slow rhythm. 60 BPM, the rate of the resting heart, 0.1 Hertz, 6 breaths per minute. We are heading towards the same parasympathetic destination. And so in a slow drumming practice, we want to apply this principle of rhythmic auditory stimuli, and we want to entrain the heart into a state of rest, which is 60 BPM. So slow rhythmic auditory entrainment guides physiology towards parasympathetic baseline. Now, when I say 60 BPM, I'm not a machine. Unless we go by a 60 BPM metronome, if you are just sort of freestyle drumming, you just want to drum slow and feel what slow feels like. But if we want to operate off of a metronome, you can choose a 60 BPM metronome and practice to that. And I will drum. And if you want to drum along with me, if you have a drum, or if you want to clap or sort of like tap your chest, that will work in the same way. Okay. So far we've seen 4 different interventions, all which converge on the same pathway. There was forest therapy, which is this environmental input. There was the breath, so resonance breathing, self-generated coherence at 0.1 hertz. Toning, which also activates coherence at 0.1 hertz, and then drumming, which helps to guide rhythmic entrainment. So the same mechanism again, parasympathetic activation, vagal tone enhancement, cardiovascular coherence, and HPA axis downregulation. All of these are different entry points, but there is the same physiological pathway as the disruption. So restoration moves through what is disrupted. So now we get into the last part, which is translation into nursing practice and also self-care. So as I mentioned, we saw all of those different sort of predictable, measurable occupational hazards, and you as nurses, and especially leaders in holistic nursing, have a responsibility to yourself and the person in front of you, right? So if you are rhythm disrupted by shift work, hospital noise, IARC Group 2A exposure, all of these disruptions that you learned about in Section 2, which are your occupational reality, and you're trying to treat this person that you're trying to serve who also has a hormonal, environmental, socially converging rhythm disruption, then how are we actually, who is in training who, right? Who is the anchor in that relationship? And so the responsibility as a practitioner to be aware of the disruptions that are happening in our nervous system and actually how to mitigate them is something that needs to come into the occupational focus as well as the institutional focus, right? And so my hope is that you can be leaders for that type of change within the system. So let's get into this section. Where is your rhythm right now? Okay, so just take 2 minutes to just privately go through these questions. In the last 7 days, how regular were your sleep and wake times? That's your circadian anchor. When were you last outside in the morning daylight without a screen in front of you? That's your light entrainment. Where is your breath right now? So count for 30 seconds and see how many breaths you are cycling every 30 seconds. Okay. Where in my body do I notice held tension or holding pattern is the last question. Where are you carrying your somatic load? All right. And in this next section, there are 3 different patients with 3 different disruptions. And so this is problem-based learning. There is no right or wrong answer here. It is the purpose of this exercise is to try to determine where the disruption is coming from, and then what intervention might you suggest in order to restore that disruption. Okay, so the first one is a colleague that is on night shift. An ICU nurse, 11 years on nights, reports insomnia on days off, weight gain, feeling wired and tired, and their recent labs actually show borderline A1C, elevated evening cortisol. So which rhythm do you feel is disrupted, and which section for intervention fits here the best? Okay. Vignette B is the postmenopausal patient. So there's a 58-year-old, new onset hypertension, hot flashes, anxiety, fragmented sleep, reluctant to add another medication. What rhythm-based intervention could you offer in a 15-minute visit? All right. And there is the chronic pain, fibromyalgia on 5 medications, describes never feeling settled, HRV unmeasured, but breathing very shallow at rest. What is the smallest first step that respects their nervous system? Okay, so go ahead and just write that down for yourself. Okay. And this last section is actually a integration. All right, so for yourself, what is one rhythm intervention that you are going to start on this week? Is it going to be forest therapy? Is it going to be breathing? Is it going to be toning or drumming? You just want to name the smallest intervention that is actually doable on a working day. Okay. And now for your practice. What is one patient context where you would introduce a rhythm intervention? And so name a specific patient or population, name the intervention, and name when you might offer it. Okay. So go ahead and write that in your journals or your notebooks. And then here is the list of resources that were used to create this presentation. So once again, my name is Janelle Corpuz. I'm from Kin Unified Healing. Thank you guys so much for joining me. These are all the ways that you can contact me or keep in touch with Kin. Actually, we have this new app that we just released called Kin Resonance Lab, and the majority of the interventions that I showed you here are actually on the app. So if you'd like to use it, explore it, please do. Here is my email and phone number, our website, and a QR code to learn more about our endorsed sound therapy certification. Thank you guys so much. See you soon.